Nobody told Zara that the palace would smell like jasmine in December. That was the first thing she noticed when the black car pulled through the iron gates. Jasmine, everywhere, climbing the stone walls like it owned the place, which, in a way, it did. She had pressed her face against the cold window and thought, I could love a place that smells like this. She was 24 years old, and she had never in her life owned anything that did not eventually ask something unbearable of her in return. The palace did not wait long to ask. His name was Aryan. People in the city called him the Alpha King, not because of any actual throne. There was no throne, not literally, but because of the way he walked into a room and made every other person in it suddenly aware of their own smallness. He was the kind of man who did not raise his voice, because he never needed to. He was the kind of man who had people around him at all times without ever appearing to want company. He owned 3 companies, 2 foundations, and more square footage across 4 cities than Zara had walked in her entire life. She was a teacher, secondary school. She taught literature to teenagers who did not want to be taught literature, which she found, on most days, genuinely funny. They met at his younger sister's wedding. Zara was the maid of honor. Aryan was the older brother who showed up late, sat in the back, and somehow still managed to make the photographer unconsciously rotate toward him every 3rd shot. She noticed this the way you notice a weather change. Not dramatically, just a shift in the quality of the air. At the reception, she had been standing near the dessert table eating something with mango in it that she hadn't been able to identify but refused to stop eating, and he had appeared beside her and said, without preamble, "You're the only person at this wedding who looks like they're actually enjoying themselves." She had looked at him with mango still on her spoon and said, "That might be because this dessert is doing something illegal." He had laughed. A real one, the kind that surprised him. And that was it. That was the whole story of how it started. Mango and a real laugh, and a man who looked at her like she was a door he hadn't noticed was a door. The first 6 months were easy, in the way that the beginning of most things is easy, before the weight of what you are building becomes visible. He called her every evening. He remembered things she mentioned once, offhandedly. The name of her first dog, the specific bread from the specific bakery near her school that she bought on Fridays, the fact that she read with a pen in her hand because she had never been able to stop underlining. He sent her the book she had been looking for 2 years, a collection of translated Urdu poetry, out of print, which he had found through channels she could not imagine and did not ask about. She told her mother about him in February. Her mother had been quiet for a moment, and then said, in the careful voice she used when she was choosing her words the way you choose fruit, "Zara, men like that don't usually arrive empty-handed." Zara had said, "Mama, he just found me a book." Her mother had said, "That's what I mean." She did not understand this at the time. She filed it in the drawer where she kept things she was not ready to open, and went on loving him in the open, unguarded way she had always loved things, with her whole chest, without a plan for what to do if it stopped working. He asked her to move into the palace in October. Not the main wing, a separate house on the estate grounds, he said. More private, more hers. She could keep her school. She could keep everything. He was not asking her to change. He was only asking her to be closer. She said yes because it was true that she wanted to be closer. She said yes because the estate had jasmine on the walls and a library with a window seat that made her feel like a person in a novel she would have loved at age 12. She said yes because he had never, not once, made her feel small, and she had spent enough years around people who did that without even trying that the absence of it felt like oxygen. She moved in on a Saturday. It took 3 trips. The difficulty did not arrive all at once. That is the thing nobody tells you about the kind of difficulty that comes wrapped in comfort. It does not knock. It settles, like sediment, like the way a house shifts on its foundation over years, so gradually that you only notice when a door that used to swing freely starts catching on the frame. The first door that caught was the school. He never said she should leave it. He said things like, "You work so hard, and you should rest more, and I've been thinking, you could do so much more with your time." These were not orders. They were not even requests. They were just shapes in the air, repeated, until the air itself changed composition and breathing took more effort than it used to. She stopped buying the Friday bread because she was no longer going to the school on Fridays. Then she stopped going on Thursdays. By March, she had reduced to 3 days a week, and by May she had taken a leave of absence she told herself was temporary, and she sat in the library with the window seat and read books she did not underline because she had, at some point she could not identify, stopped carrying a pen. She noticed this one afternoon, the absence of the pen, and sat very still for a long time looking at her hands. She called her mother. Her mother said, "Come home this weekend." Zara said she couldn't. There was an event. Her mother said, "Come the weekend after." Zara said she would try. She did not try. There were always events. The estate had a calendar that ran like a government, structured, unavoidable, populated with dinners and receptions and philanthropic galas, where Zara stood next to Arian and smiled with her whole face and said the right things to the right people and came home feeling scraped out. She was not unhappy, that was the confusing part. She was comfortable and cared for and living in a place that smelled like jasmine, and the man she loved brought her coffee the way she liked it, without being asked, and had never once raised his voice at her and thought about her constantly. She knew he thought about her constantly because he told her so and because the evidence was everywhere. The small, precise attentions, the remembered details, the book from the out-of-print collection she had mentioned once that now lived on her nightstand. And still, something, the pen, the bread on Fridays, the door catching on the frame. The document arrived in November, 14 months after she had moved in. It was in a folder on the desk in the study she had been given. Her study, he called it, and it had been placed there by his estate manager, a careful, dry-voiced man named Mr. Pillai who communicated exclusively in measured sentences and gave nothing away with his face. The folder was labeled in neat font, Estate Formalization, Partner Documentation. She opened it because she thought it was something she was meant to sign, an update to the security clearance for the gate, perhaps, or a guest approval form. There had been several of those. She was used to being handed papers. She was not used to what was inside this one. It was a legal agreement, 43 pages. She was a literature teacher, and not a lawyer, but she had grown up in a household where her father read every contract he signed and made her sit beside him while he did it, explaining as he went, and the habit had stayed. She read slowly. She turned each page with the particular attention of someone who has been trained not to skim the fine print. She got to page 19. Page 19 contained a clause about what the document referred to as resident partner status within the estate. It was dense and layered and took 3 readings to fully resolve, but what it said, in the flat, clean language of estate law, was this: any person formally recognized as a resident partner of the estate, upon signing this agreement, would transfer to the estate's holding trust all independent legal claim to any property, savings, or assets accumulated during the period of cohabitation. It was not permanent. There was a reversal clause, but the reversal required a legal process that, Zara could see even without a law degree, was designed to take years and cost more than she had. She sat with the document in her lap for a while. She thought about the library, the window seat, the jasmine. She thought about the pin she had stopped carrying. She thought about her mother saying, "Men like that don't usually arrive empty-handed." She went to find Arian. He was in the main house, in the room he used for evening calls, standing near the window with his phone pressed to his ear. He held up one finger, one moment, and she stood in the doorway holding the folder and waited. When he finished the call, he turned and looked at the folder, and something moved across his face. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the expression of a man who had been expecting a conversation and had been hoping, without much conviction, that it would not arrive tonight. "You found the formalization documents," he said. "Page 19, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Zara, it's a standard estate clause. My lawyers drafted it years ago. It protects the trust. It transfers everything I own to the trust. While you're here, it's a formality. It is 43 pages. He sat down on the edge of the chair near the window. He did not look defensive. He looked tired in a way that told her this was not the first version of this conversation he had had in his life, and that the previous versions had ended with the woman in the doorway deciding that a 43-page formality was worth signing for the sake of the jasmine and the window seat and the man who remembered the bread. "I was going to explain it to you," he said. "When?" He said nothing. "When you handed me the pen," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw it, the thing she had been not seeing for 14 months, the thing that lived underneath all the careful attentions and the remembered details and the real laugh at the wedding. He loved her. She was not wrong about that. But he loved her the way you love something that is yours, not the way you love something that is its own. There is a difference. It is not a small one. She put the folder on the table between them. She did not throw it. She set it down with both hands, the way you set down something fragile that you no longer want to carry. "I'm not going to sign this," she said. He said, "Zara, I'm not going to sign this," she said again. "And I think we both know that means I'm leaving." The silence after that was the longest she had ever stood in. He did not ask her not to go. She would remember this later, the fact that he did not ask. She would hold it up to the light and look at it from different angles for a long time, trying to understand what it meant. Whether it meant he respected her enough to let her choose. Whether it meant he believed she would come back. Whether it meant something she did not have a word for yet. She went back to the guest house. She packed one bag. She had more things there by then, nearly 2 years of accumulated things, but she took only what she had brought. The rest she left. The books from the estate library, the good coat he had given her, the perfume she had never quite liked but had kept because he had chosen it. She left all of it. She took the Urdu poetry collection, the one he had found for her, out of print, through channels she still couldn't imagine. She did not know why she took that one. She told herself it was because it was hers. He had given it to her, not lent it, but she knew, the way you know things you're not ready to say out loud, that it was because she could not make herself put it down. The car came at 11. Mr. Pillai arranged it without being asked. She would think about this later too, whether he had seen this coming, whether he had arranged the car for other women on other late nights, whether this was a choreography that the estate had performed before and would perform again. She did not look back at the gates as the car drove through them. She looked forward, at the dark road, at the city lights ahead, at the dashboard clock reading 11:23, and she thought, "I need to call the school in the morning." That was the first solid thought she had. Not about Arian, not about the folder, about the school, about calling them in the morning and asking if her leave of absence could be ended and whether her classes had been covered and whether they needed her back. They needed her back. She started on a Monday. Her students were suspicious of her energy the first week. She was buying the Friday bread again. She had gone back to the bakery the Saturday after she left and stood in line for 20 minutes and bought 2 loaves and eaten half of one on the walk back, and she was carrying a pen again, and she had found, in the drawer of her old desk at her mother's house where she had moved temporarily, a copy of a novel she had taught before and loved, and she reread it on the train and underlined 4 sentences and wrote in the margin, "Still true." Her mother did not say, "I told you so." She said, "You're sleeping in the room with the yellow curtains. There are extra blankets in the chest." Zara said, "Mama, I'm fine." Her mother said, "I know. That's why there are blankets." She was fine. That was the thing. She had expected to be more broken than this, and she wasn't, which confused her at first, and then didn't. She thought about it one evening while she was grading essays, her students writing about great expectations, all of them missing the point in slightly different ways, which she found deeply endearing, and she thought, "I am not broken because I got out while I still knew my own name." The leaving was hard. The staying would have been harder. There is a version of herself that signed the document and stayed and wore the perfume she didn't like, and called the estate her home until she forgot what the word home had originally meant to her. She could see that version of herself very clearly. She was glad, in the uncomplicated way you are glad to have not stepped off a curb into traffic, that she was not her. She found a flat in April. 2nd floor, 2 rooms, a window in the kitchen that looked out over a small street with a tree. She bought a lamp. She chose it herself, from a shop, without consulting anyone. It was a slightly strange lamp, tall and narrow and an odd color, somewhere between gold and brown, and she loved it extremely. She taught, she read, she started, cautiously, writing again. Not fiction, just notes, observations, the kind of private writing she had done throughout her 20s that had stopped at some point she could not name. She bought herself the specific tea she liked, which she had been unable to have at the estate because the kitchen had not stocked it and she had never asked them to, which she now identified as the single most revealing detail of everything that had happened to her there. She had not been able to ask for her own tea. She wrote that down. She underlined it. Arian's first message came in February, 3 months after she left. It said, simply, "I hope you're well." She read it twice. She put her phone face down on the table and went back to grading. That evening she typed back, "I am. Thank you." She left it there. He did not respond, and she did not expect him to, and she slept fine that night. The second message came in May. It was longer. He said that he had been thinking. He said that the clause on page 19 had been removed from the estate documentation. He said he had asked his lawyers to redesign the whole framework, not just the one clause, and he named a law firm she had heard of and said they had spent 4 months on it. He said, "I'm not telling you this so you'll come back. I'm telling you because it was wrong and I knew it, and I let it sit there because it was convenient, and that is not something I can make smaller than it is." She sat with that message for a long time. She thought about the version of him she had first met, the one near the dessert table, the one who had laughed a real laugh, the one who found out-of-print books through channels she couldn't imagine. She thought about the version of him who had stood near the window with his phone and not asked her to stay. She thought about page 19. She typed back, "Thank you for telling me. I mean that." Then she made her tea and sat at the window and watched the tree on the street below do the thing it did in May, which was fill up with something small and white that looked like snow but wasn't. He called in August. She picked up. He asked if he could see her. She said she needed to think about it. He said, "Take the time you need." She said, "I will." They both knew this was true. She thought about it for 3 weeks. She thought about it on the train to school and on the train home, and while grading, and while buying bread on Fridays, and while standing in her kitchen at 7 a.m. with her specific tea. She thought about what it would mean to see him. She thought about what it would mean not to. She thought about whether there was a version of things where the man and the document could be separated, where she could hold the parts she had loved and set down the parts that had worn her to a shape that wasn't hers. She thought about the pen. She was carrying one now. She carried one everywhere. She called him back in September. She said, "I'll meet you. Not at the estate. Somewhere outside." He said, "You choose the place." She chose the café near the school, the one where she bought the Friday bread, because she felt, standing on that ground, exactly like herself. She felt like no one's resident partner. She felt like a person who had chosen a slightly strange lamp and knew how to ask for her own tea. He came wearing a coat she hadn't seen before. He looked tired the way people look tired after a long, honest reckoning with themselves. Not depleted, but changed. Simpler, somehow. Less gravity. More weight. He sat across from her and did not reach across the table. He said, "You look well." She said, "I am well." He said, "I know. I can see it." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Outside the cafe window, the street was doing what streets in September do. A slight chill in the light, people moving faster, the particular energy of a city that has decided summer is over and doesn't feel bad about it. He said, "I spent a long time thinking about what I owe you." She waited. He said, "Not an apology. I already owe you that, and it won't be enough, and I think we both know that. What I kept thinking about was this. You made yourself smaller inside my life, and I let you, because it was convenient, and I told myself it was love. But love doesn't ask you to stop carrying a pen. I know that now. I don't know if I knew it then, or if I knew it and looked away. I think I looked away. I think that's worse." Zara looked at him across the table. She looked at the man who had found her an out-of-print book, and also put a 43-page document on a desk, and waited to see if she would sign it without asking questions. Both of those men were the same man. She had been understanding this for 10 months. She understood it more, now, with him sitting in front of her in the café near her school in September, looking simpler and heavier all at once. She said, "I know you think I left because of page 19. He said, "Didn't you?" She said, "Page 19 told me something I needed to know, but I left because of the pen." He looked at her. She said, "I stopped underlining books. I stopped buying bread on Fridays. I stopped asking for my own tea. I didn't stop because I wanted to. I stopped because the shape of things inside your estate didn't have room for those things, and instead of making room I just stopped. And you watched it happen and didn't say anything, and maybe you didn't notice. But that's the thing, Arian. That's actually the thing, that you didn't notice." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "I notice now." She believed him. That was the complicated part. She believed him completely, and that did not resolve anything. She ordered her tea, the specific kind, the one the cafe had and the estate kitchen hadn't. She wrapped both hands around the cup when it came and felt the warmth of it and looked at the man across the table who had driven to her city and sat in her cafe and told her the true version of what he had done and had not reached across the table. She thought about the jasmine on the walls in December. She thought about the library window seat. She thought about the first real laugh, the mango dessert, the book. She thought, there is no version of this that wraps up clean. She thought, I would not trust a version that did. She said, I'm not coming back to the estate. He nodded. She said, but I'm not closing this door either. I want you to know that. He said, can I ask why? She said, because you drove here. Because you sat across from me instead of across from your lawyers. Because you told me the true version, and it was ugly, and you told it anyway. That matters. It doesn't cancel the rest of it, but it matters. He looked at her across the cafe table, with the September light coming through the window and the street outside doing its September thing, and she thought, watching him, this is the most honest he has ever been with her. And she thought, it took losing her to get here. And she thought, that is not nothing. And she thought, that is also not enough. And she thought, I can hold both of those things at once. I have been practicing. He left before she did. He paid for the tea without asking, which she allowed because it was tea and not a 43-page document. At the door he paused and turned back and said, the book, the Urdu poetry collection, I hope you kept it. She said, it's on my nightstand. Something moved across his face. The real thing, again, the one that surprised him. He said, good, and then he walked out into the September street, into the chill light, and she watched him through the window for a moment, before she looked back down at her tea. She did not know what happened next. She was genuinely, peacefully comfortable with not knowing. The next chapter was unwritten and she was, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, completely unbothered by the blank page. She had a pen. She could wait. She finished her tea. She went back to school. On Friday she bought the bread.